On the night of April 14th, 1912, the RMS Titanic was cutting through the North Atlantic on its maiden voyage. Aboard the most luxurious ship ever built were 2,224 people. But this was not just an ordinary ocean liner. The Titanic was, on that night, home to the greatest concentration of wealth and power on the planet. Among its passengers were some of the richest men and women in the world, billionaires, industrial magnates, European aristocrats, a collective fortune that exceeded billions of dollars in today's values. At 11:40 p.m., everything changed. The Titanic struck an iceberg. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the ship that was considered unsinkable disappeared beneath the frigid waters of the Atlantic. 1,517 people died that night, among them some of the most powerful men of the era. But some survived, and their stories reveal not only tragedy, but also heroism, love, cowardice, and the impossible choices that had to be made when money could no longer buy salvation. Today, you're going to meet the 10 richest and most influential passengers who were aboard the Titanic, their fortunes, their stories, and what happened to each of them on that fateful night.
Starting our list at number 10, the Countess of Rothes. A British noblewoman, Countess Lucy, was traveling with her parents to Vancouver. She was exactly the type of European aristocracy you would expect to find in Titanic's first class. Elegant, refined, accustomed to luxury. But when the ship began to sink, the Countess showed she was much more than just a high society lady. Placed in lifeboat number 8, she was so assertive about how the boat should be handled that the sailor in charge made an unusual decision. He handed her the tiller. The Countess of Rothes literally steered her own lifeboat to rescue. She survived.
At number 9, Dorothy Gibson, one of Hollywood's first stars. At 22 years old, Dorothy was a silent film celebrity. She was returning from Italy when she boarded the Titanic. In fact, one of her films, A Lucky Holdup, was literally playing in theaters while she was crossing the Atlantic. When the ship began to sink, Dorothy secured a spot on lifeboat number 7, curiously, the first to be launched into the sea. But here's the most surprising detail. Just 1 month after the disaster, Dorothy starred in and wrote a film called Saved from the Titanic, and she wore the same white silk dress and the same coat she had worn on the night of the sinking. The trauma, however, was real. It's said that Dorothy had a nervous breakdown during filming and could never speak comfortably about that night again. She survived, but carried the scars forever.
At number 8, we have a controversial couple, Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon and Lady Lucy Duff Gordon. Sir Cosmo was a wealthy Scottish aristocrat. Lady Lucy was even more famous, one of the most influential fashion designers of the time, owner of the luxury fashion brand Lucille Ltd. But their story on the Titanic is shrouded in scandal. The couple managed to escape in a lifeboat that had only 12 people when its capacity was 40. After the rescue, accusations emerged that Sir Cosmo had bribed the crew not to go back and pick up survivors from the water. He allegedly offered £5 to each sailor, a significant sum at the time. Both survived, but their reputations were tarnished forever. British society never fully forgave them.
Number 7, J. Bruce Ismay. And this is perhaps the most controversial story of all. Ismay wasn't just another wealthy passenger. He was the chairman of the White Star Line, the company that owned the Titanic. It was Ismay who had the idea to create a fleet of luxury ocean liners to compete with rival companies. The Titanic was his dream come true. And when the ship he created began to sink, Ismay did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He boarded a collapsible lifeboat. Collapsible C was launched about 20 minutes before the Titanic disappeared completely. Meanwhile, Captain Edward Smith went down with his ship.
Thomas Andrews, the designer, died trying to save passengers. Hundreds of men stayed behind, following the code of women and children first. But J. Bruce Ismay, the most powerful man aboard, survived. The press crucified him. Newspapers called him a coward. Society rejected him. He lived the rest of his life under the shadow of that decision. He survived, but many say it would have been better if he hadn't.
Number 6 is Thomas Andrews, and this is a story of courage and tragedy. Thomas Andrews was 38 years old and the chief naval architect at Harland & Wolff, the shipyard that built the Titanic. He was the principal designer of the ship. Every detail, every luxurious salon, every technical innovation, Andrews knew it all. He was aboard as part of the Guarantee Group, the team responsible for observing the ship's performance on its maiden voyage and making notes for improvements. When the iceberg tore through the hull, it was Thomas Andrews who went down to inspect the damage. And it was he who gave Captain Smith the devastating news. The ship had, at most, 2 hours. For the next 120 minutes, Andrews didn't think about himself. He ran through the corridors, knocking on cabin doors, waking passengers, shouting for people to put on their life jackets. He threw deck chairs overboard so they could serve as floating devices. He adjusted life jackets on women and children. Thomas Andrews was last seen in the first-class smoking room, alone, arms crossed, staring fixedly at a painting on the wall called The Approach of the New World. His life jacket was lying on a nearby table. He had given up. Thomas Andrews died on the ship he created. His body was never recovered. He left behind a wife and a young daughter, but he also left a legacy of heroism that few can match.
Number 5. Margaret Molly Brown, but the world knows her as Molly Brown the Unsinkable. Unlike most of the wealthy on the Titanic, Molly wasn't born into wealth. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants and worked in a department store before marrying J.J. Brown, who discovered a rich vein of gold in 1893. Fortune came late, but when it came, Molly decided to use it to make a difference. She was a socialite, philanthropist, women's rights activist, and on the night the Titanic sank, she showed exactly what she was made of. Molly helped other people board the lifeboats before being persuaded, practically forced, to enter lifeboat number 6. But as soon as she was in the boat, she realized that Quartermaster Robert Hitchens was refusing to go back to pick up survivors from the water, saying it would be too dangerous. Molly wouldn't accept that. She confronted Hitchens directly, demanding they go back. When he continued refusing, she threatened to throw him overboard. Other women supported Molly. Hitchens partially yielded, but the time had already passed. On the Carpathia, the ship that rescued the survivors, Molly immediately organized a relief committee. She raised funds for third-class passengers and crew members who had lost everything. She never stopped helping. In 1932, Molly received the French Legion of Honor for her overall good citizenship, including her efforts on the Titanic and her activism for women's rights. Number 4. George Dunton Widener and his son, Harry Elkins Widener. George Widener was one of the most powerful business magnates in the United States. The Widener family had a fortune estimated at $800 million in current values. They lived at Linwood Hall in Pennsylvania, one of the largest mansions of the American Gilded Age. George, his wife Eleanor, and their son Harry were returning from vacation in Europe. Harry was a passionate bibliophile and had purchased a rare 1598 edition of Francis Bacon's Essays in London. On the night of April 14th, the Wideners were invited to dine with Captain Edward John Smith in the first-class dining room. It was an evening of celebration, luxury, and caviar. No one could imagine what would happen a few hours later. When the ship began to sink, George and Harry helped Eleanor and her maid into lifeboat number 4. The two women begged the men to board as well, but father and son refused. Women and children first, they said. It was the last time Eleanor saw them. George and Harry Widener died when the Titanic sank. Their bodies were never recovered. Eleanor, devastated by the loss, later donated $3.5 million to build the Widener Memorial Library at Harvard University in memory of her son and his passion for books. The library exists to this day. And the family commissioned commemorative stained glass windows designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany, the American master glassmaker, to honor George and Harry. Money didn't save them, but their legacy remains.
Number 3. Benjamin Guggenheim, the man who decided to die in style. Benjamin was a member of the powerful Guggenheim family, magnates of mining and metal smelting. His personal fortune was $3 million, about $54 million in current values. He was the father of Peggy Guggenheim, who would later become one of the greatest art collectors of the 20th century. Benjamin was traveling with his French mistress, singer Leontine Aubart, his secretary Victor Giglio, and his chauffeur. Neither his wife nor his children were aboard. When the Titanic began to sink, Benjamin initially helped women and children board the lifeboats. He got his mistress to safety, but then he and his secretary made a decision. They went back to their cabins, they removed their life jackets, and they put on their finest evening clothes, full tuxedos, impeccable white ties. Witnesses saw them for the last time on the grand staircase of the ship, sitting comfortably in leather chairs with glasses of cognac in hand and lit cigars. Benjamin Guggenheim left a message to be delivered if he were rescued. "We've dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." And then he added, "Tell my wife I did my duty." Benjamin Guggenheim and Victor Giglio died when the Titanic sank. Their bodies were never recovered.
Number 2. Isidor and Ida Strauss. And this is without a doubt the most moving story of all. Isidor Strauss was 67 years old and co-owner of the Macy's department store in New York. Together with his brother Nathan, he had transformed Macy's into one of the most famous stores in the United States. His fortune was $4 million, about $87 million in current values. But what truly defined Isidor wasn't his money, it was his marriage. Isidor and Ida had been married for over 40 years. In those 4 decades, they had rarely spent a night apart. They traveled together, worked together, lived together. In April 1912, they were returning from a winter vacation in the south of France. They boarded the Titanic in Southampton. The crossing would be the final leg of a peaceful journey. Then came the night of April 14th. When it became clear the ship was sinking, the crew began loading the lifeboats with women and children. Isidor and Ida went up to the deck, along with Ida's maid, Ellen Bird. An officer approached Isidor and offered him a place in the lifeboat, but Isidor refused. "I will not board before other men," he said. The officer then turned to Ida. "Come, madam, there is room for you." Ida began to enter the boat, but then she stopped. She looked back at her 67-year-old husband standing on the deck, and then she stepped out of the boat. "No," Ida said, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so will we die, together." She removed her fur coat, a very expensive coat, and gave it to Ellen Bird, her maid. "Take this," said Ida. "You'll need it more than I will." And then she returned to Isidor's side. Ellen Bird, crying, got into the lifeboat. As the boat descended toward the ocean, she looked up one last time. Isidor and Ida were on the deck, arm in arm, just looking at each other. Witnesses said they saw the couple sitting in deck chairs, holding hands as the ship sank. They didn't try to swim, they didn't try to separate, they just stayed together. Isidor Strauss's body was recovered days later. He was wearing expensive clothes, had documents in his pocket identifying him. Ida's body was never found. This story touched the world. Newspapers published headlines about the couple who chose to die together. A statue was erected in Strauss Park in Manhattan with the inscription, "Lovely and pleasant in their lives, in death they were not divided." And decades later, when James Cameron made the film Titanic in 1997, he included a scene showing an elderly couple lying together in bed as the ship sinks. That scene was inspired by Isidor and Ida Strauss. They chose love over survival, and in that moment, they became immortal. And now, number 1. John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man aboard the Titanic, possibly the richest man in the world.
John Jacob Astor IV had a fortune of $87 million, which equals $2.2 billion today. But that amount doesn't fully capture his power. He was an Astor, one of the most powerful dynasties in the United States. Astor owned the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, the St. Regis Hotel, and real estate properties throughout New York. He was a businessman, inventor, he held patents for bicycle brakes and turbine engines, and even a science fiction writer. He published a novel called A Journey in Other Worlds about space travel in the year 2000. At 47 years old, John Jacob Astor IV had everything: money, power, influence, respect. And then he caused the biggest social scandal of the era. In 1909, Astor divorced his first wife. And in 1911, he married Madeline Talmadge Force, a young woman of only 18 years old. Astor was 47. It was a 29-year age difference. New York high society was scandalized. Divorce was already shocking. Marrying a woman young enough to be his daughter was unacceptable. Astor and Madeline were socially ostracized. So they fled, literally. They spent months traveling through Europe and Egypt, hoping the scandal would die down, and Madeline became pregnant. In April 1912, they decided it was time to return home. Madeline was 4 months pregnant and wanted to have the baby in the United States. They booked passage on the newest, most luxurious ship in the world, the Titanic. And then came the night of April 14th. When the ship began to sink, Astor immediately took Madeline to the deck. She was pregnant, cold, terrified. Astor wrapped her in his coat and helped her into lifeboat number 4. And then Astor asked the officer, "May I accompany my wife? She is in delicate condition." The officer looked at him. "No, sir. No man may board until all the women are safe." John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man in the world, a man accustomed to having everything he wanted, didn't argue. He didn't offer money. He didn't use his power. He simply asked, "What is the number of this boat?" "Number 4, the officer replied. "Very well," Astor said. He wanted to be able to find his wife later. Astor stepped back. Madeline, crying, tried to get out of the boat, but other women held her back. The boat began to descend. It was the last time she saw her husband. Witnesses said they saw John Jacob Astor IV later on deck, smoking a cigarette, calm, watching the sea. He helped other women and children board the remaining boats. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic sank completely. John Jacob Astor IV died that night. He was 47 years old. His body was recovered a week later by the ship Mackay Bennett. In his pockets, they found a leather wallet with $2,500, a gold watch, a pen, business cards, and a pair of pliers, probably one of his inventions. Madeline Astor survived. 4 months later, on August 14, 1912, she gave birth to a boy. She named him John Jacob Astor VI, in memory of the father he would never know. The richest man on the Titanic, the richest man in the world. In the end, his money made no difference, but his humanity did.
10 people, billions of dollars in collective fortune. Aristocrats, magnates, movie stars, designers, socialites. Some heroes, some controversial, some cowards, all human. On the night of April 14th, 1912, money didn't buy salvation. It didn't buy more lifeboats. It didn't buy more time. It didn't change the laws of physics or the deadly ice of the North Atlantic. But what this tragedy revealed was the true character of these people. Some, like Isidore and Ida Strauss, chose love. Others, like Thomas Andrews and John Jacob Astor, chose duty. Molly Brown chose courage. Benjamin Guggenheim chose dignity. 5 of the 10 survived. 5 died. But all of them left stories that time cannot erase.